If nuclear war were to break out in the next few years, there's a solid chance a C-130 Hercules would relay the message that ended the world. Let's talk about the US Navy's custom fleet of doomsday aircraft we call TACAMO, short for Take Charge and Move Out, and why it may soon be up to the venerable C-130 to relay the message that ushers in doomsday. I'm Alex Hollings, and let's talk about some sea power. The vast majority of America's deployed nuclear arsenal are all aboard Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. Now, the US operates 18 of these subs, but only 14 of them actually carry nuclear weapons. The Ohio class was designed to accommodate up to 24 Trident II D5 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, though that total missile count was reduced from 24 down to 20 as a part of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, that was signed on April 8th of 2010. But trust me, 20's enough. Now, the Trident II has a range of more than 7,500 miles and tops out at speeds in excess of Mach 24. And importantly, each Trident II weapon could carry as many as 14 multiple independent reentry vehicles, or separate nuclear warheads, meaning a single Ohio-class sub could carry as many as 280 warheads on board, making one Ohio-class submarine the fifth-ranked nuclear power on the planet, with more warheads on its own than any nation other than the US, Russia, France, and China. But it's important to know that because of a combination of arms control agreements and American nuclear warfare doctrine, Ohio-class boomers, as they're often called, actually carry far fewer warheads on board than that. Nonetheless, these submarines really represent the most potent leg of America's nuclear triad. But there's a big problem with that. You see, Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines hide for a living. These vessels were designed specifically to evade detection and tend to sail fairly deep. And you may not know this, but radio transmissions can't penetrate seawater. The truth is, America's deployed ballistic missile submarines are out there operating alone and unafraid, with next to no support whatsoever and very few means of communication with the outside world, and that includes the American command and control infrastructure. In fact, the only really reliable way to communicate with these subs while they're traveling deep underwater is via VLF, or very low frequency communications. Now, you can't do that with just any old antenna, so the United States has 5 VLF stations positioned around the world, each with literally hundreds, if not thousands of miles of wire strewn across massive communication arrays meant to broadcast these very low-frequency signals deep into the ocean. But if World War III were to kick off, these massive communication stations would absolutely be among the first targets struck, effectively severing all communications between the United States government and the vast majority of its deployed nuclear arsenal. So what do you do when you need to get a message to a submarine deep underwater and you no longer have a VLF station to broadcast it? Well, you call a TACAMO aircraft. Now, TACAMO stands for Take Charge and Move Out, and the history of these platforms is interesting enough to warrant a video on its own. But put simply, TACAMO aircraft are purpose-built platforms with massive, miles-long VLF antennas that can be rolled out and then retracted from the back of the aircraft. In order for a TACAMO aircraft to actually relay a message to one of these subs, they've got to unroll some 5 miles of antenna and then fly in an extremely tight circle, maybe just 10 miles per hour above stall speed for prolonged periods of time, while this massive antenna relays what is effectively a text message to these submerged subs. Now, those text messages, known officially as emergency action messages, are what would relay the command to launch America's nuclear weapons. And if war were to break out and America's ground-based VLF stations were destroyed, it would be up to today's Boeing 707-based E-6B Mercury TACAMO aircraft, or likely tomorrow's C-130-based TACAMOs, to relay that message. Now, the entire TACAMO mission actually began with the C-130 all the way back in 1961 with the Navy's earliest experiments to determine if it were even possible to operate a VLF communications array from an airborne platform. Now, those earliest tests were literally conducted by just driving vans full of communications equipment straight into the cargo bays of C-130s. But within just a few years, the system had proven so effective that the Navy custom ordered 8 specially built C-130 TACAMO aircraft. And by the late 1980s, those aircraft were wearing out, but the mission was still absolutely vital. So, the Navy moved on to purchasing the last 16 Boeing 707s to roll off the assembly line, converting them first into E-6A Mercuries and then into E-6B Mercuries that continue to serve today. But with the oldest of those aircraft now some 33 years old, the Navy is now on the market for the next generation of TACAMO platforms. And it looks like they want to go back to the Hercules. In April of 2023, the U.S. Navy awarded Lockheed Martin a one-time $62 million engineering, modification, and developmental contract to assess just how well-suited their new C-130J TAC-30 could be for the TACAMO mission. Now, this study is still underway, and to date, the Navy has not announced a decision, but based on the requirements for the role, I honestly think the C-130 would be far better suited than today's Boeing 707-based E-6B Mercuries are. TACAMO aircraft need to fly in tight concentric circles for prolonged periods of time in order to relay those emergency action messages, which is far easier to do in a quad-prop aircraft like the C-130 than it is in a jet-powered platform like the E-6B. But more importantly than that, you can operate C-130s from austere airstrips just about anywhere in the world, whereas E-6B Mercuries require well-manicured runways to function. And if we're talking about a nuclear war scenario, those could be pretty tough to come by. Now, the Navy is still actively considering its options for platform in the TACAMO mission, with an entirely new VLF subsystem built by Collins Aerospace already slated to be installed in whatever aircraft ultimately gets the job. It's likely that we'll hear a final decision sometime soon, however, because the Navy is expected to purchase their first 3 new TACAMO aircraft as soon as 2027, with 6 more budgeted for the following year. So, while it's no sure thing that the C-130 will get this job, I've learned over the years that the one thing you should never do is count the Hercules out. And that's why there is a very good chance this 70-year-old design will still be an absolutely vital part of 21st century warfare. In fact, the B-52 may outlive us all, but it just might be the C-130 that ushers in our demise. And on that cheerful note ends this edition of Sea Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.